300 guests watched her say it. "This is my sister Colleen, the fat pig who thinks she's a soldier." The chandeliers sparkled. The string quartet played on. And somewhere in that ballroom, a general's eyes narrowed, recognition dawning. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. I stepped into Pinerest Manor feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. White marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly in the corner while servers glided past with champagne flutes that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. My sister Brianna had always been drawn to displays of wealth. Today she was in her element, marrying Marcus Riley, son of a prominent defense contractor. The guest list read like a who's who of Virginia money and power. I'd chosen my outfit carefully that morning. A simple navy dress, my grandmother's pearls, comfortable shoes. Not competing, just showing support. That was the plan anyway. Stay in the background, be polite, get through the day without drama. I should have known better. Brianna spotted me across the room. Her designer gown caught the light as she moved, every inch the radiant bride. She waved me over with the kind of gesture you'd use to summon staff. I walked toward her, keeping my expression neutral. Years in the military had taught me to control my face even when my stomach was twisting. "Everyone," she announced, her voice carrying across the marble floor. "This is my sister Colleen, the fat pig who thinks she's a soldier." The words hit like a slap. Several guests chuckled, assuming it was some kind of inside joke between siblings. It wasn't. I felt heat creep up my neck, but I didn't let my expression change. Showing emotion would only feed her need for attention. I'd learned that lesson decades ago, back when we were kids and she'd discovered that hurting me made other people notice her. Marcus stood beside her, offering an awkward smile but no correction. He never contradicted her. That should have told me everything I needed to know about their marriage. But at the time, I was too focused on breathing steadily and maintaining my composure. The room felt suspended in that moment. The music continued, conversations resumed, but I could feel eyes assessing me. They saw a woman in her mid-30s with a military regulation haircut and a body built for endurance, not elegance. They had no idea who I really was or what I'd accomplished. That was intentional. I'd spent years keeping a low profile, and for good reason. I extended my hand to Marcus's father. General Leonard Riley was exactly as I remembered him from years ago. Tall with silver hair and eyes that could still command a room. When he shook my hand, something shifted in his expression. His grip was firm, professional, but his gaze lingered on my face. "Colleen Ward," he said slowly, testing the name. "That sounds familiar." "Just here for the wedding, sir," I replied with a polite smile. But his posture had already changed. I recognized that look from my years on base. Recognition mixed with respect. He was placing me, connecting dots in his memory. The problem was, if he remembered me, others might start asking questions. And questions about my past could lead to questions about my present, questions I wasn't ready to answer publicly. Brianna was too absorbed in her moment of glory to notice the general's reaction. She'd moved on to another group of guests, probably sharing another story about her disappointing sister. She'd always seen me as the family failure. The one who'd joined the army because I couldn't hack it in the real world. While she'd been spending our father's inheritance on graduate school parties and designer handbags, I'd been on military bases at ungodly hours, ensuring supply lines kept running in places most Americans couldn't locate on a map. What she didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that 3 years ago, I'd been part of the team that saved Fort Blue Ridge from closure. That base employed thousands of civilians. Its shutdown would have devastated the local economy. Marcus's father had quietly lobbied to keep it open, but the numbers hadn't added up until our logistics team found solutions no one else had seen. I'd worked 100-hour weeks, torn apart decades of inefficient contracts, and rebuilt supply chains from the ground up. The base stayed open. Thousands of families kept their jobs and paychecks. And Brianna thought I was just a fat pig in uniform. I kept my face neutral, but my mind was already running through scenarios. If General Riley connected me to Fort Blue Ridge, Marcus would find out. And if Marcus found out, he'd start wondering about money. He and Brianna always wondered about money. They circled it like sharks, always looking for the next source to tap. A server passed with appetizers. I took one just to occupy my hands, barely tasting it. My attention was on General Riley, who was now speaking quietly to Marcus. I could read lips well enough to catch Fort Blue Ridge and logistics officer. My heart rate kicked up. This was exactly what I'd hoped to avoid. Brianna linked arms with Marcus and steered him toward a cluster of wealthy donors. I stayed near the windows, observing, calculating my next moves. The string quartet shifted to a new piece, something classical and expensive sounding. I took a sip of water and reminded myself why I'd come. Family obligation. Showing support despite our difficult relationship. Avoiding unnecessary conflict, but conflict had a way of finding me, especially where Brianna was concerned. Several guests attempted small talk. They asked the usual questions about my work. I gave my standard vague responses. Logistics coordination. Nothing glamorous. Mostly paperwork and supply management. They'd nod politely and drift away, losing interest as soon as they realized I wasn't going to provide entertaining anecdotes about combat or foreign intrigue. That was exactly how I preferred it. The less people knew, the less they could weaponize later. I had nothing to hide. Every investment, every financial decision was documented and legal. But I'd learned that in the military, perception could damage you as badly as actual wrongdoing. Privacy was my best defense, especially with a family that treated me like an adversary rather than a sister. From across the crowded ballroom, I caught General Riley watching me again. His expression wasn't hostile, just thoughtful, like a commander solving a tactical problem. I wondered if he was remembering that night at Fort Blue Ridge, the emergency meeting in a cramped conference room where he'd fought desperately to save his command. I'd been the junior officer with the data and the plan that made it possible. He'd barely acknowledged me then, just nodded once and moved on to shake hands with the colonel. Now here we were at his son's wedding, and my sister had just publicly humiliated me. Brianna's laugh rang out across the room. She was holding court, telling some story that made her the hero and me the punchline. Her audience laughed on cue. They couldn't see the calculation behind her performance, the way she'd always used my quiet nature as a foil for her own shine. But something felt different this time. The general's focused attention, the way Marcus's expression had shifted when his father whispered to him. It was as if the social dynamics in the room had changed, though most people wouldn't notice the subtle shift. I straightened my shoulders and adjusted my grandmother's pearls. I wasn't going to give Brianna the reaction she wanted. Let her think she'd won this round. I'd been underestimated before. It never lasted. A server offered me more water. I declined and checked my watch. The ceremony would begin soon. Brianna was posing for photographs, Marcus beside her with his practiced smile. General Riley remained at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, still watching me with that assessing gaze. Our eyes met across the room. He gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible. I returned it once. A silent acknowledgement between people who understood chains of command and unspoken respect. No one else noticed the exchange. Brianna was basking in attention, oblivious to everything except her own moment. Marcus was checking his phone. The guests were drinking, chatting, celebrating. And I stood there in my simple dress, the so-called fat pig, waiting patiently for whatever would come next, my expression revealing nothing. I tightened my grip on the water glass and moved closer to the windows. Outside, the manor's manicured lawn stretched toward a line of trees. My posture remained military straight, even though this was supposed to be a day off. Years in uniform do that to you. They shape how you stand, how you breathe, how you maintain composure when someone's actively trying to break it. 3 mornings a week, I'm up before dawn for logistics briefings with officers who outrank me by decades. We don't have champagne receptions or elegant venues. We have spreadsheets, convoy schedules, and the constant pressure of ensuring soldiers downrange have what they need when they need it. No glory, no headlines, just the unglamorous work of making sure a truck doesn't break down because a critical part didn't arrive on time. People like Brianna think logistics is boring. They have no comprehension of how much depends on the boring details. One miscalculation, one delayed shipment, and soldiers' lives are at risk. That's what I think about when she mocks my career. I still remember my first day at Fort Blue Ridge. The place looked like it was dying. Warehouses full of outdated equipment, broken forklifts, demoralized staff, and constant rumors about closure. Civilian employees whispered about layoffs in the break rooms. Military families wondered if they should sell their homes before the market collapsed. The base had become a political football, and everyone knew it was probably just a matter of time. When my commanding officer asked for volunteers to audit the supply operations, I raised my hand. Not because I thought I could save the place, but because I'd been trained to solve problems, and this was clearly a problem that needed solving. We spent weeks buried in dusty files and decades-old contracts, finding waste that everyone had stopped noticing because it had become normal. Overpayments to contractors who'd long since stopped providing adequate service. Duplicate systems running in parallel because no one had bothered to consolidate. Transportation routes that made no logistical sense but had been maintained because that's how we've always done it. My late husband Mark used to say I had a gift for seeing patterns in numbers. He was the one who taught me to dig past the obvious answers until the real problem revealed itself. By the time our task force finished, we'd cut enough wasteful spending to make Fort Blue Ridge competitive again. Congress decided to keep it open. Thousands of people kept their jobs and their livelihoods. General Riley, a colonel at the time, flew in for the final briefing. He shook many hands that day. Mine wasn't one of them. Junior officers don't get recognition. We just go back to our regular duties and continue the work. That's the part Brianna never understood. She thinks military service is parades and ceremonies and medals. She doesn't see the weekends spent on call, the deployments that don't make social media posts, the endless policy reviews and budget meetings. She saw my military pay stub once and laughed, saying I worked like a mule for a teacher's salary. I didn't bother explaining the satisfaction of a job done right or a mission that saves livelihoods. She wouldn't have heard me anyway. When Mark died in a training accident 6 years ago, the Army provided a death gratuity of $400,000. It was meant to pay off our mortgage and cover expenses while I figured out my next steps. I did pay off the mortgage on our small house near base, but instead of just sitting on the remaining funds, I invested carefully. Nothing flashy, nothing risky. Just steady investments in companies I understood, including a small logistics contractor that was bidding for work at Fort Blue Ridge. The contractor needed capital to expand their operations. I believed in their business model, so I invested. The company grew. My investment grew with it. Nothing illegal, nothing secret, but I never advertised it because the military takes conflicts of interest seriously. I wanted my promotions earned on merit, not questioned because of financial connections. My bank statements don't advertise wealth. They suggest comfort, stability, careful planning. That's exactly how I want it. That's how I've built my life since losing Mark, quietly, carefully with no fanfare. Now standing in Brianna's elaborate wedding venue, I felt my training settling over me like armor. Keep your voice level. Keep your hands steady. Let emotional storms blow themselves out. That was the discipline I'd learned both on base and in dealing with my family. But underneath the calm, I felt something new building. Not anger at the insult I'd heard worse, but recognition that a pattern was reaching a breaking point. Brianna had always assumed she could knock me down because no one important was watching. This time, someone important was watching, and he was starting to remember. I caught General Riley's reflection in the window glass. He was still observing me, and I could tell his thoughts had moved beyond the wedding. He was thinking about a base, about supply chains, about a quiet officer who'd done the impossible and then disappeared back into routine duties. A server passed, and I took another appetizer for cover. My mind shifted into the analytical mode I used before inspections. If Brianna and Marcus started digging into my finances, what would they find? Tax returns all clean. Investment records all properly reported. JAG, the Judge Advocate General's office, already had copies of everything. I'd been meticulous about documentation. But being legally correct doesn't always stop people from making your life difficult. I'd seen officers lose their careers over mere appearances of impropriety. And Brianna, I knew from experience, was very good at creating damaging appearances. Her laugh carried across the ballroom again. She was telling yet another story. This one about how I'd once shown up to a family dinner in my uniform because I supposedly didn't own proper civilian clothes. The truth was I'd come straight from a crisis on base, but she'd turned it into a joke about my lack of sophistication. Guests chuckled politely, not knowing they were hearing a weaponized version of reality. I stared out the window at the perfect hedges and immaculate grounds, thinking about dusty forward operating bases and the organized chaos of military logistics. Perspective helps. This ballroom drama was nothing compared to keeping supply lines running through hostile territory. A hand touched my elbow gently. An older woman, introducing herself as Marcus's cousin, asked if I was really in the army. Yes, ma'am. Logistics and supply chain management. She looked puzzled for a moment, then murmured something about how nice that was before drifting away. That was the typical civilian response. Vague approval, zero comprehension. Which was fine. I wasn't here to educate people about what I do. In the distance, Brianna's voice rose again, calling me our family's rough-around-the-edges hero, in a tone that made hero sound like a polite word for embarrassment. I inhaled slowly, held it, exhaled even slower. Mark's advice echoed in my memory. Don't wrestle with pigs. You both get muddy and they enjoy it. I smiled faintly at the irony of that particular metaphor. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text from a colleague on base about Monday's supply delivery schedule. Even off duty, the work followed me. I typed a quick response, thumbs steady. Work was predictable. Family was anything but. The string quartet transitioned to another classical piece. Guests began moving toward the ceremony seating area. Brianna swept past me in a cloud of expensive perfume, not even glancing in my direction. Marcus trailed behind her, looking back at me once with an expression I couldn't quite read. Calculation, maybe. Or curiosity. General Riley remained near the entrance, still observing me with that same thoughtful intensity. I squared my shoulders, finished my water, and followed the crowd toward the seating. Whatever happened next, I'd handle it the same way I always had. One step at a time. No unnecessary drama, no visible weakness. Years of military discipline had taught me that. Years of being Brianna's sister had taught me something else entirely, that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you need to watch most carefully. I left Panorus Manor late that evening. My dress still carried faint traces of champagne and perfume. The air outside was sharply cooler than the overheated ballroom, clearing my head immediately. My practical flats clicked on the stone walkway as I headed to my car. I didn't look back at the glowing windows where Brianna was probably still holding court, playing the perfect bride for her captive audience. I started the engine and set my phone face down on the passenger seat. I drove away without turning on music, preferring the quiet hum of the road to process the evening's events. At 6 the next morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table in my small rental near base. Coffee mug in one hand, laptop open to a logistics dashboard in front of me. My phone buzzed with a new message. Brianna lunch this week. We need to talk about family matters. Marcus wants to be there too. No emojis. No warmth. Not a request, a command. I read it twice. Family matters was Brianna's code for money. It had always meant money. My thumb hovered over the reply button. Then I set the phone down and returned to my coffee. Let her wait. Let her wonder. On my laptop screen, supply numbers scrolled past in orderly columns. Trucks, pallets, transport schedules. Numbers were simple, predictable. People, especially family, were not. My inbox pinged with another notification. A colleague forwarding a link to a wedding blog. Brianna had already posted photos. There I was in the background of one shot, jaw slightly clenched, while the caption read, "With my loyal sister in uniform. Always serving." The rewriting of history had begun. She was already crafting a public narrative that made her look supportive and me look like the humble, grateful sibling. At 9:15, my doorbell rang. A courier stood there with a large envelope addressed to me in expensive calligraphy. Inside was a glossy invitation to a family financial planning dinner at an exclusive club in downtown Richmond, hosted by Brianna and Marcus Riley. RSVP requested. I stared at the heavy cardstock. They weren't even pretending anymore. My phone buzzed again. Howard Steele's name appeared on the screen. He'd been my financial advisor since Mark's death, a calm professional who never pushed products I didn't need. I answered immediately. Got your text, he said without preamble. Are you sure you want to meet with them? I haven't agreed to anything yet. You might want to know, he continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. A firm out of Arlington pulled some of your public financial filings yesterday. They didn't break any laws, but they're definitely searching for something. Looking at your investments, your business structures, the contractor work at Fort Blue Ridge. It's all legal information, but someone's paying good money to dig. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Brianna. I'd bet everything on it. Marcus's family has the kind of connections that make this easy, Howard confirmed. They'll frame it as due diligence or family concern. You need to decide whether you want to engage with them or shut this down completely. I'm still hoping it's just curiosity. Colleen. Howard's voice was gentle but firm. You don't hire a firm like Arlington Asset Research out of curiosity. That's a serious investigative company. They charge serious money. I thanked him and ended the call. The elaborate invitation still lay on my table, its embossed lettering practically screaming money. Around noon, another message from Brianna appeared. Please confirm lunch today. Marcus and I really want to discuss opportunities. Dad-in-law might join us. That last sentence said everything. She was dangling General Riley like bait, assuming I'd jump at the chance to network with someone powerful. She had no idea he and I had already crossed paths professionally, or that his opinion of me might be very different from what she imagined. I opened a fresh notebook and started documenting everything. Not dramatically, just facts, dates of messages, names of firms, times when my filings were accessed. Years in the military had taught me that documentation is your best defense. If this situation escalated, I needed a clear record. By 3 in the afternoon, I'd had enough coffee to make a decision. I texted back lunch works. Tomorrow noon. Your choice of location. Better to face her directly than give her space to spin stories behind my back. The next morning, as I laced up my running shoes, I thought about Mark. He'd always said my biggest strength was staying calm while everyone else panicked. You're like a chess player, he'd told me once. You see 3 moves ahead while they're still reacting to the last one. On my run around the base perimeter, my mind organized the facts. Brianna was married into a powerful family but drowning in debt from her lifestyle. Marcus had a fancy title but no real authority in his father's company. Together, they'd discovered just enough about my career to suspect there might be more money than they'd assumed. And now they were coming for it, wrapped in the language of family concern and mutual benefit. Back home, I showered, dressed in a simple black dress, and drove to the restaurant Brianna had chosen. A high-rise club with valet parking and river views. Inside, everything was designed to intimidate. Polished wood. Hushed conversations. Napkins folded into origami shapes. Brianna was already seated at a corner table. Marcus sat beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. She stood up, air-kissed my cheek, and gestured for me to sit like she was granting an audience. "Colleen, thank you so much for coming," she said brightly. "We're just so excited to talk about future plans." "I'm sure you are," I replied evenly. Marcus cleared his throat. "We've been thinking there might be some opportunities where everyone benefits. Brianna feels strongly that we should start working together as a family. Pooling resources, that kind of thing." Brianna poured herself wine before the food even arrived. "You've been so successful, Colleen. We're proud of you. But you know, military pensions aren't what they used to be. You should let us help you manage things. Marcus has excellent contacts in financial planning. We could really maximize your assets." I let her talk. Years of military briefings had taught me the value of listening first, speaking last. She slid a folder across the table toward me. I didn't open it. "What's this?" I asked. "Just some ideas," she said with her practiced smile. "Trust structures, family foundations, investment strategies. We could really leverage your position in the military for everyone's benefit." "My position," I repeated slowly. She said it like I was a chess piece to be moved. "Not a person with my own life and career." I looked at Marcus. He avoided eye contact, his hand tightening around his wine glass. "Brianna," I said calmly, "you're making a lot of assumptions." "I'm just thinking ahead," she replied smoothly. "You work so hard. You deserve to enjoy your success. And we're family. Family should share resources. That's what families do." The phrase "family should share" hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't quite locate. I pushed the folder back across the table toward her. "I'll think about it." Her smile faltered for just a second. Then she laughed softly. "Don't take this the wrong way, Colleen. We're just looking out for you. That's what family does." "Of course," I said. "I appreciate your concern." We finished lunch mostly in silence after that. She filled the gaps with chatter about honeymoon plans and wedding highlights. Marcus stared at his plate, contributing nothing. When the check arrived, she signed it with a flourish, like she was doing me a favor by treating. Outside, sunlight glittered on the river. I put on my sunglasses and walked to my car without looking back. My phone buzzed immediately. Howard's name on the screen. "Call me as soon as possible. More activity on your filings." I unlocked my car, slid behind the wheel, and sat for a moment. My hands rested steady on the steering wheel. In my head, facts were lining up as neatly as supply crates on a loading dock. Brianna thought she was moving pieces on a game board. She had no idea I'd been trained to see the entire battlefield. The screen on my phone glowed in the dim light of my living room as I called Howard back. My hands were steady, but my jaw was tight. He answered on the first ring. "They've escalated. Arlington Asset Research pulled your public disclosures again. Now they're cross-referencing with military contracting databases, looking for any connection between your investments and your official duties." I clicked my pen and started taking notes in my ever-present notebook. What exactly are they looking for? Anything they can spin into a conflict of interest. Howard replied. Your paperwork is clean, absolutely clean. But they're clearly building towards something. These aren't amateurs, Colleen. Someone's paying serious money for a serious investigation. They're not amateurs, I agreed. They're my sister and her husband, using someone else's resources and connections. Howard exhaled audibly. Your documentation is bulletproof, but perception can still damage you. I'd recommend making sure your command knows everything before this becomes gossip or, worse, a formal inquiry. I thanked him, ended the call, and stared at my notebook. Years of military paperwork had taught me to be absolutely meticulous. Every dollar accounted for, every signature dated, every disclosure filed. But I knew how quickly rumors could spread, especially about money and military connections. I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal financial records. Every investment properly disclosed. Every potential conflict documented and cleared by the Judge Advocate General's office. No secrets. But a determined person with resources could twist anything if they tried hard enough. I saved everything to an encrypted drive, then poured another cup of coffee. At noon, I went for a long run on the base perimeter trail. The spring air cut through my lungs, sharp and clarifying. Running had always helped me think. Each stride gave me space to process another piece of the puzzle. Brianna wanted control of my money. Marcus wanted access to what he perceived as my military connections and influence. Together, they'd hired an expensive firm to dig into a decorated officer's financial life. That wasn't family concern. That was leverage hunting. Back at my apartment, I showered, changed into jeans and a plain t-shirt, and sat back down at my kitchen table. My phone buzzed with yet another text from Brianna. Hope yesterday's lunch was helpful. Marcus thinks we should formalize something soon. Leonard General Riley is curious about your work, using the General's first name, trying to make it sound casual, familiar. But the message was clear they were positioning themselves to use his authority and curiosity. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a blank email to my commanding officer. Subject line, proactive disclosure. I typed out a concise summary of my investments and attached all supporting documentation. I explained that I'd become aware of private inquiries into my finances and wanted to ensure complete transparency with the Judge Advocate General's office. No drama, no excuses. Just facts presented in clear bullet points. Years of writing logistics reports had taught me the value of clarity over complexity. When I hit send, I felt a weight shift. Not relief, exactly. Just readiness. That evening, Howard sent me an encrypted file. This is what I've found so far, his message read. I opened it. Screenshots of Marcus's credit reports, Brianna's mounting credit card debt, email exchanges between them and a law firm that specialized in estate disputes and family asset contests. Notes from the private investigator about my possible hidden assets. They weren't fishing anymore. They were building a case. I scrolled through the files slowly, methodically. My sister's financial situation was catastrophic. Maxed out credit cards, overdue personal loans, a mortgage underwater on an investment property she'd purchased at the peak of the market. Marcus wasn't any better. Luxury cars leased through shell companies that were hemorrhaging money. Business ventures that had quietly failed, leaving debt in their wake. Their entire lifestyle had been smoke and mirrors for years. And now those mirrors were cracking. I wrote down key points in my notebook. Not to use as weapons, but as shields. If Brianna tried to drag my reputation through the mud, I needed proof of her motive. The next morning on base, I stopped by the Judge Advocate General's office. Captain Ramirez raised his eyebrows when I handed him my documentation packet. "You're ahead of the game," he said, flipping through the pages. "I'd rather you hear it from me than discover it through a complaint or inquiry," I answered. He skimmed the documents quickly. "Everything looks completely in order. We'll log this officially. If anyone comes asking questions, we'll already have the full picture." I thanked him and left. Outside, the sun glinted off rows of military vehicles in the parking lot. Soldiers moved in practice patterns, loading equipment, checking manifests. It was a rhythm I knew by heart. Reliable. Predictable. Unlike family. On the drive back to my apartment, my phone rang. Howard again. "One more thing," he said. "The investigator they hired isn't just a paper pusher. Former military investigator. They're taking this very seriously." "Good," I said. "That means their bills will pile up faster and they can't afford it." Howard chuckled. "Just keep documenting every interaction. And Colleen, don't let them bait you into an emotional response. That's what they're looking for." I hung up, thinking about Brianna's confident smile at lunch. She'd always been certain she could control me, manipulate me, use me. She had no idea what 15 years of deployments, audits, and crisis management had done to my patience and strategic thinking. That afternoon, I sat at my dining table with stacks of files spread out before me. Contracts, emails, bank statements, investment records. Mark's photo sat in a frame at the corner of the table. I touched it once gently before returning to my notes. He'd taught me to be methodical, to document everything, to think 3 moves ahead. It had saved my career before. It would save it again now. The television murmured in the background with local news about defense budget hearings. I muted it. My focus was on the private investigator's notes, which Howard had managed to obtain. Subject appears to maintain modest lifestyle inconsistent with apparent asset growth. The observation was meant to sound suspicious, but I read it as a compliment. My phone vibrated. Another message from Marcus. We're concerned about you. Let's meet for dinner soon. Just family. Concerned about me. Right. I set the phone face down and went back to highlighting key passages in documents. My kitchen smelled of coffee and ink. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on the street. Hours later, when I finally stood to stretch, my table looked like a military operations center. Color-coded tabs, timelines, names connected by lines. I wasn't planning an attack. I was building absolute clarity about what was happening and why. In logistics, clarity wins battles. As I rinsed my coffee mug, my phone buzzed one final time that evening. An email alert. A reply from my commanding officer, received and reviewed. Thank you for the proactive transparency. Documentation noted in your personnel file. Short. Professional. Exactly what I'd hoped for. I set the mug in the drying rack and wiped my hands on a towel. Through my window, the base lights blinked in the distance like a small city. Somewhere out there, trucks were moving along routes I'd helped plan. Somewhere in town, my sister was planning her next move against me. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun and opened my laptop again. The cursor blinked on an empty document page. My fingers hovered, then began typing a new header contingency plan. It was a habit from deployments. Prepare before you're forced to react. Anticipate problems before they become crises. The room was quiet except for the soft clicking of the keyboard. My breathing stayed steady. In my mind, the fancy wedding hall with its chandeliers and champagne had already faded, replaced by rows of organized files and clear documentation. Different contexts, same skill set. Track everything. Stay calm. Be ready. I closed one file and opened another, building a detailed timeline of every interaction since Brianna's wedding. Dates, names, witnesses, next probable moves. No drama, no panic. Just order where others were bringing chaos. My phone buzzed again. I let it vibrate against the tabletop until it stopped, then returned to my typing. The next morning began before sunrise, as most of my missions did. I brewed strong coffee, laced up my boots, and tucked the flash drive containing all my documentation into my uniform pocket. The base was still mostly asleep when I drove through the security gate. Headlights caught glimpses of soldiers jogging in formation, their breath visible in the cold air. Everything about that scene, the discipline, the order, the forward movement, reminded me why I loved military service and why I was determined to protect my reputation. At Judge Advocate General Headquarters, the duty sergeant ushered me directly to Captain Ramirez's office. I handed him a sealed envelope containing notarized statements of all my investments, updated conflict of interest disclosures, and a cover letter summarizing the harassment I was experiencing from my sister and her husband. I'd spent the previous night refining everything to a single page of clear bullet points. No emotional language, just facts. Ramirez read through it quickly. You've been extremely thorough, he said. This isn't even close to a violation of regulations. We'll log everything, notify the Inspector General's office, and add it to your personnel file. If anyone tries to use this against you, we'll already have a complete documented record. That's all I want, I said. His expression softened slightly. I've seen plenty of officers panic when family finances and government work collide. You're handling this like a military operation. Smart approach. I nodded once. I wasn't looking for praise. I was looking for protection. When I left his office, a text from Howard was waiting. We need to talk in person. Found something significant. We met at a diner off-post, the kind with bottomless coffee and laminated menus that hadn't changed in decades. He slid into the booth across from me, laptop bag under his arm, and opened it without small talk. Colleen, your sister's financial situation isn't just bad. It's catastrophic. He turned the screen toward me. Graphs, account statements, credit reports filled the display. "Look at this," he said, tapping each column. "Multiple mortgages. 3 business loans Marcus personally guaranteed. Revolving credit lines maxed out completely. They're one missed payment away from defaulting on everything." I studied the numbers. Years of logistics work had trained me to read financial patterns at a glance. "They've been living like this for how long?" "Since before your promotion," Howard said. "I traced Marcus's business entities. Most are empty shells. He's been pitching failed startup ventures to investors while covering losses with new credit lines. Brianna's been co-signing everything." I pushed my coffee aside, processing. "And now they're targeting me to fill the hole they've dug." He nodded grimly. "Hiring that investigator wasn't cheap either. They're betting they can force some kind of payout or settlement. Or at minimum, leverage your reputation to access financial opportunities." I leaned back against the worn vinyl seat. The hum of other conversations faded as I calculated my next move. This wasn't about sibling rivalry or hurt feelings anymore. This was about financial survival for them and reputation protection for me. Howard closed his laptop. "I can get formal documentation from credit agencies confirming all this debt. I can also document the investigator's contract and billing. If this turns into a formal complaint or legal action, it'll clearly show their motive." "Do it," I said without hesitation. "And send a summary to Captain Ramirez. I want JAG to see exactly who's trying to damage my reputation and why." He smiled faintly. "You've always appreciated a solid paper trail." "Paper trails save lives," I replied. "And careers." When I returned to my apartment, I spread Howard's printouts across my dining table. Debt totals, overdue notices, private investigator invoices, everything documented in black and white. I highlighted key points and filed them systematically. Each page felt like another layer of protective armor. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Brianna, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Colleen, we really do need to sit down again. Things are getting complicated, and Marcus has some ideas about how we can all work together for everyone's benefit. Sugar over steel." That was always her approach. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my secure email and sent Captain Ramirez an update. Attached summary of my sister's financial position and documented evidence of ongoing harassment. I remain fully transparent and cooperative. I ended the message with a single line: "I wanted to ensure you have complete context for any future inquiries." By late afternoon, I drove to the base gym to clear my head. Deadlifts, squats, pull-ups, simple movements that demanded complete focus. My muscles burned, but my mind sharpened. When you know you're being investigated, panic is a luxury you cannot afford. After showering, I walked to the base exchange for groceries. At the checkout, a young private recognized me from a logistics seminar I'd taught months earlier. "Ma'am, you're the officer who solved that fuel routing problem in Kuwait, right?" he asked. I gave a small smile. "That was a team effort, but thank you." His question reminded me why my reputation mattered. Years of clean, dedicated work could be destroyed by one family member's greed if I wasn't extremely careful. Back home, the sun was setting over the training fields beyond my window. I poured a glass of water and sat back down at my table. My files were lined up like troops ready for inspection. I added one more section to my documentation binder countermeasures. Under that header, I wrote in block letters full disclosure to command completed. Evidence of sister's debt documented. PI contract confirmed. Personal statement prepared. Then I stared at the blank space below. My pen hovered before writing set firm boundaries. Prepare for confrontation. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of my wall clock. I thought about Brianna's triumphant face at her wedding. I thought about Marcus's calculated smile. I'd spent my entire adult life keeping military supply lines open under adverse conditions. This was just another type of battlefield. Different terrain, but the same strategic principles applied. My phone buzzed again. A new email from Captain Ramirez received and logged. Will be included in official file. Recommend you avoid all direct contact with involved parties until we provide further guidance. Good. That was exactly my plan. I stood stretched and opened my balcony door. The evening air carried the smell of cut grass and diesel fuel from the motor pool. Life on base continued in its orderly fashion. Trucks rumbling across parking lots. Soldiers heading home after their shifts. Inside, my dining table looked like the command post of a careful campaign. Folders, tabs, highlighted documents. But there was no drama here. No panic, just thorough preparation. I closed the balcony door, locked it, and returned to my table. My eyes moved over the debt totals one more time, committing the key numbers to memory. Then I slid all the files into my locking briefcase and set it by the door. The briefcase closed with a solid click that felt final, though I knew this wasn't over. Not a line drawn in sand, but a perimeter established with clear documentation. I picked up my empty coffee mug, washed it carefully, and set it upside down on the drying rack. Outside my window, the sky deepened to navy blue and the base lights flickered on one by one, steady as heartbeats. My breathing matched their rhythm. Calm, deliberate, steady. Nothing about this moment looked dramatic from the outside. Just a soldier finishing paperwork at her kitchen table on a quiet evening. But every detail, the files, the disclosures, the carefully organized binder, represented the same strategic move taking control before someone else could seize it. And as the clock ticked forward, the only sounds in my apartment were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional passing car outside. My plans were settling into place piece by documented piece. The next day, I left my apartment carrying the locking briefcase, dressed in a simple black dress and low heels. Deliberately civilian. No uniform, no insignia, nothing Brianna could twist into an image of military arrogance or intimidation. The restaurant she'd chosen was the same upscale location as our previous lunch. This time, though, I arrived 30 minutes early to observe and prepare. The host led me to a window table with a panoramic city view. Crystal glasses sparkled under carefully designed lighting. The menu prices could have funded a week of training exercises. I set my briefcase beside my chair and ordered water. No wine. No distractions. At precisely 11:55, Brianna and Marcus appeared at the entrance. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Marcus wore a navy blazer and carried himself like someone desperately trying to project confidence. They approached with bright smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Colleen," Brianna said, leaning in for the obligatory air kiss near my cheek. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," I replied evenly. We sat down. A server immediately poured wine into Brianna's and Marcus's glasses. They didn't offer me any, which was perfectly fine. Brianna opened her menu with a practiced flick of her manicured fingers. I took the liberty of pre-ordering the wine. "I remembered you liked this one." I nodded once. "Water's fine for me today." Marcus forced a smile. "We wanted to clear the air. After all, family is the most important thing." Brianna set the menu aside and leaned slightly forward. "Colleen, I've been giving our family situation a lot of thought. We're at a point where transparency benefits absolutely everyone involved." I sipped my water. "Go on." Her tone remained sweet, but her words sharpened with each sentence. "Dad always respected people who understood business, and Marcus has been very successful advising families with complex financial situations. We thought we could help you structure things better, protect yourself legally, maybe even leverage some of your military connections for everyone's benefit." Marcus jumped in. "We're talking about a genuine win-win scenario. Your investments and position could open significant doors. Our expertise could streamline everything. We'd all benefit substantially." I set my glass down carefully. "My finances are already properly structured," I said. "And I don't mix personal family connections with military contracting. That's a serious conflict of interest." Brianna's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's very admirable, of course, but you've been quite discreet about your financial success. Some people might find that level of secrecy troubling, especially given your position. The military takes conflicts of interest extremely seriously, doesn't it?" There it was. The threat dressed up as sisterly concern. "Yes," I said calmly. "That's exactly why the Judge Advocate General's office has a complete file of all my financial disclosures. My command is fully aware of everything. There are no secrets." For the first time, Marcus's confident mask cracked slightly. He glanced at Brianna. She blinked twice, then reached for her wine glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "Well," she said brightly, recovering quickly, "I'm glad you're prepared. We just want what's best for everyone involved." "I'm certain you do," I replied, my tone unchanged. The server arrived with appetizers. None of us reached for them. The tension across the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brianna tried again. "Colleen, this really doesn't have to be adversarial. We're family. We could build something significant together. A family foundation, a trust structure, whatever makes sense. Imagine the good we could do." I leaned in slightly, matching her posture. "Brianna, you called me a fat pig at your wedding in front of 300 people. Then you hired a private investigator to dig into my financial life. That's not family. That's a calculated business move. Her face froze. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Emotions were running high at the wedding. Let's not dwell on past misunderstandings. I'm not dwelling, I said softly. I'm clarifying that I understand exactly what this is. Brianna set her wineglass down with a faint clink. We've done our research, Colleen. You've been investing very successfully for years. You've built a portfolio most people can't even imagine. And you've done it all very quietly. That's impressive. But privacy is fragile. If the wrong people start asking questions, they might not like the answers they think they've found. Then it's fortunate for me, I said, that all those answers are part of public record and official military documentation. You're absolutely right that I've been careful. Being careful is what keeps soldiers alive, missions funded, and families from imploding. But if you're implying some kind of blackmail, I'd advise against it. It won't work. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Brianna attempted a softer approach. Colleen, think about Dylan. He deserves stability. We all do. This fighting isn't good for anyone. Dylan's stability doesn't depend on me, I said. It depends on his own choices. And he's smart enough to recognize when someone's using him as leverage. Brianna's eyes flashed just for a second before she forced another smile. We're simply offering to help. You could make a contribution to a family trust. In return, we'd handle all the public-facing aspects. You'd maintain your privacy. Everyone would benefit. I folded my hands on the table. I'm not contributing a single dollar to anything you or Marcus control. The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. A server approached to refill water and wine, clearly sensing the tension but maintaining professional composure. Brianna tried one final angle. You've always played the role of the responsible big sister, Colleen. Always thinking you're the smartest one. But you're not untouchable. I tilted my head slightly. Neither are you. Marcus raised a hand. Maybe we should all take a breath and cool down. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a thin folder, and laid it deliberately on the table between us. This, I said calmly, is a copy of the evidence I've already provided to the Judge Advocate General's office. Your debts, your private investigator contract, your communications with a law firm that specializes in estate disputes. Everything is documented. Brianna's face drained of color. Marcus went rigid in his chair. I continued in the same calm, measured tone. You're right about one thing. Transparency benefits everyone. That's exactly why my command knows everything about my financial situation. If you choose to continue your investigation, you'll find yourselves explaining to federal authorities why you've been misrepresenting my assets and hiring investigators to dig into a serving military officer's private life. Do you really want to have that conversation? Marcus's eyes flicked to Brianna. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. We just wanted a conversation, she said, her voice lower now, less confident. And we're having one, I said. Here's my offer. Stop the investigation. Withdraw any complaints or inquiries. Stop the veiled threats. Focus on your own financial problems. If you do that, this ends here. Otherwise, you'll be facing not just me, but military legal authorities and potentially federal law enforcement. The restaurants seemed to quiet around us. Even the background music faded into the tension at our table. Brianna swallowed hard, attempted another smile that failed completely. We'll think about your suggestion. Good, I replied. I closed the folder, slipped it back into my briefcase, and stood up. My chair scraped softly against the polished floor. Lunch has been enlightening, I said. Thank you for your time. Neither of them moved or responded. I left cash on the table for my water. A habit from deployments, pay your share and leave clean. Then I walked out into the bright midday sun. The air outside smelled of exhaust and city sidewalks. My heels clicked steadily as I crossed the street to my car. Sliding behind the wheel, I took a deep, slow breath. No tremor in my hands, no adrenaline spike, just clarity. The briefcase sat on the passenger seat like a silent witness to what had just happened. I started the engine and drove away, merging smoothly into city traffic. Buildings, bus stops, and people on lunch breaks passed by in a steady stream. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with incoming messages. I didn't check them. At the next red light, I adjusted the rear-view mirror and caught my own eyes in the reflection. Steady. Focused. This wasn't a scene from some melodrama. It was just a soldier applying the same discipline she'd used on deployments to the chaos her family had created. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator. The engine hummed smoothly as city blocks rolled past. Each turn already mapped out in my head, just like any other route I'd planned. Back in my apartment, I set the briefcase on the dining table and opened the balcony door to let in fresh air. City noise drifted up in fragments traffic. A dog barking somewhere, a bus squealing to a stop at the corner. The sounds felt grounding, normal. I loosened my hair from its tight bun, rolled up my sleeves and pulled my main documentation binder toward me. Everything from lunch was still fresh in my memory. Brianna's forced smile, Marcus's nervous hands, the calculating look in her eyes when she'd said untouchable. I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Response Plan Updated. Old deployment habits kicked in automatically. At the top, objective. Below it, I typed neutralize harassment. Maintain legal compliance, preserve reputation and career. Under resources, Howard's documentation, JAG official file. Complete financial records. Documented evidence of their debt and motive. Under risks, public perception. Command distraction. Potential media attention. A notification chimed. Email from Captain Ramirez. Reviewed your latest update. We've flagged this situation internally. Our strong advice, no direct contact with involved parties without legal counsel present. That phrase, without legal counsel present, confirmed this had moved beyond family drama into formal territory. I texted Howard immediately, need meeting tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have. Then I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and stood at the counter looking out my window. The base sat beyond the city like a steady anchor. Its organized rows of buildings and vehicles a stark contrast to Brianna's chaos. At dawn the next morning, Howard arrived carrying a heavy messenger bag. He dropped it on my table and began laying out files like someone dealing cards. I've got the complete picture now, he said. Their debts, their shell companies, the investigator's background and contract, and one more thing you're going to find very interesting. He handed me a document showing the private investigator's contract and fee structure. The retainer was triple the normal rate for this kind of work. They're bleeding money to investigate you, Howard explained. If you literally do nothing, they'll implode under their own financial weight within months. I'm not built to do nothing, I answered. Then let's go on offense, Howard said. Not in tabloids or social media, but through proper legal channels. Preemptive legal action. You're a serving federal officer. Harassment of a federal employee carries serious consequences. I sat down, scanning the list of legal options he'd prepared. My eyes caught on one phrase, cease and desist with defamation hold. Will that actually stop them? I asked. It forces them to make a choice, Howard explained. Either back off completely or go fully public with their accusations. And if they go public, we're already ahead of them with JAG documentation and the Inspector General's office. We frame this as protecting national security integrity from frivolous, financially motivated claims. I nodded slowly. Draft it. Howard pulled out his laptop and began typing. The rhythmic clacking of keys filled the room like a subdued drumbeat. I took another folder and began marking exhibits that would be attached to the legal filing. Brianna's messages, Marcus's credit reports, the private investigator's invoices. Each one would become part of the official record. By mid-morning, my table looked like a military operations center again. Colored tabs. Legal drafts. Timestamp documentation. I checked my watch. On base, soldiers would be finishing morning physical training and heading to breakfast. My body still ran on that schedule. Howard glanced up from his laptop. You're remarkably calm about all this. Logistics, I said simply. When you plan supply convoys through hostile territory long enough, you stop flinching at obstacles. You just route around them. He grinned faintly. Remind me never to play poker with you. When Howard left an hour later, I changed into running clothes and hit the trail. The cool air burned my lungs but cleared my head completely. Each stride felt like sorting through one more strategic consideration. The plan was straightforward, complete legal disclosure, documented harassment, preemptive legal action. No emotional outbursts, no leaked information. Quiet, methodical pressure applied through proper channels. Back home, sweat still drying on my skin. I showered and then called Captain Ramirez directly. Captain, this is Major Ward. My legal counsel is drafting a cease and desist order. I'll send you a copy for your files and for JAG review. Good decision, he said, his steady tone matching mine. We'll note it in your file. This shows you're taking appropriate protective measures. I hung up, feeling each piece click into place like a well-maintained weapon being assembled. That afternoon, Dylan texted me unexpectedly. Brianna says you threatened her at lunch. What's actually going on? I stared at the message for a long moment, considering my response. Then I typed no threats, just facts and documentation. You're welcome to review everything I've filed with JAG if you want the truth. No response came. I turned my attention back to the table. Howard's draft email arrived with the subject line "Initial legal notice for review." I opened it. The text was crisp, formal, unambiguous. It cited harassment of a federal employee, intentional misrepresentation of financial assets, and attempted coercion. It gave Brianna and Marcus 72 hours to withdraw all inquiries and confirm in writing that they would cease all such activity. I read it twice, made one minor wording adjustment, and sent my approval. Howard would dispatch it from his office under his firm's letterhead. Clean, professional, fully documented. Evening settled over the city. I reheated leftover pasta, ate standing at my kitchen counter, and then returned to my documentation. Under next steps, I wrote 1. Monitor for response. 2. If non-compliant, escalate to formal injunction. 3. Maintain normal operational tempo at work. A knock at my door interrupted my planning. My neighbor, Sergeant First Class Morales, stood there holding a package. "This got delivered to my place by mistake," he said. I thanked him, took the envelope, and closed the door. Inside was a glossy brochure for a family wealth summit scheduled for next month. Marcus was listed as one of the speakers. Even under this pressure, he was still trying to maintain appearances and hustle for clients. I almost laughed at the audacity. I slipped the brochure into my binder as Exhibit 23. Every scrap of evidence could potentially matter. Later that night, I stepped onto my balcony. The base lights glowed steady in the distance, a constellation of purpose and order. My phone vibrated with another message, but I let it sit unread. My breathing matched the slow rhythm of trucks moving on the highway below. Behind me on the table, Howard's legal draft waited to be sent. My comprehensive binder lay open to the countermeasures section. Each exhibit lined up like supplies ready for deployment. The smell of coffee still lingered from my afternoon work session. I closed my eyes briefly, not from exhaustion, but from focused concentration. In the military, you learn to live in the space between crises, to prepare during quiet moments so you're ready when chaos erupts. This was no different. When I stepped back inside, I closed the balcony door gently, sat at my table, and pulled the binder closer. My pen moved across a fresh page, creating a new section, Potential Witnesses. I listed Howard, Captain Ramirez, financial disclosure officers, anyone who could verify the truth if this escalated further. Another section, Trigger Points, media leak, regulatory inquiry, Dylan's involvement. Each possibility mapped out with a response plan. No panic, no drama, just systematic planning. The same skill set that had saved military convoys in Iraq and prevented base closures in Virginia was now focused on a different kind of battle. My own family's greed and desperation. I set the pen down, took a slow breath, and looked at the rows of organized evidence before me. Each page represented another step toward maintaining control. Not revenge for its own sake. Control, order, and a spotless record. Outside the window, a bus hissed to a stop and then rolled on. The refrigerator hummed its steady background rhythm. My hand rested on the binder's cover. I didn't feel like a cornered target. I felt like a soldier establishing a defensive perimeter, quietly and precisely before anyone realized the boundaries had already been set. And as the night deepened around me, that quiet perimeter held firm. Each piece of documentation a stake in the ground. Each contingency plan a route through potential chaos. The rhythm of military disciplines steady and reliable under my fingertips. The morning of the scheduled formal meeting arrived crisp and clear. I was up before my alarm, carefully ironing my dress uniform with the same precision I used for inspection day. My medals caught the early sunlight as I pinned them on, each one a reminder of operations completed without compromise. Today wasn't a combat mission, but the stakes felt equally high. I arrived at the JAG conference room 15 minutes early. Captain Ramirez and Howard were already there, seated at the long, polished table. Howard's laptop glowed softly, files stacked neatly beside it. Ramirez gave me an approving nod. "We'll keep this formal but straightforward," he said. "Good," I replied, setting my briefcase down precisely. Through the glass wall, I could see the hallway. Civilian shoes clicking nervously on tile. Muted voices conferring. Then Brianna appeared, flanked by Marcus and a man in an expensive dark grey suit who introduced himself as Daniel Price, their attorney. His handshake was firm but perfunctory, already assessing me. Brianna was trying hard to maintain her composure, but her eyes darted around the room nervously. Marcus looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 2 weeks. We all took seats. The atmosphere was formal, tense. Ramirez opened the session. We're here to address concerns raised about Major Ward's financial activities and to clarify any misunderstandings regarding her role as an officer in the United States Army. Price jumped in immediately. My clients have discovered information suggesting Major Ward may have undisclosed financial interests that pose a potential conflict of interest with her military duties. They've made inquiries in good faith to protect the integrity of their family. Howard slid a thick folder across the table toward Ramirez, who opened it and scanned the contents with practiced efficiency. Major Ward has provided complete disclosure of all her investments to this office and to the Inspector General, Ramirez stated clearly. Her financial activities are entirely lawful and properly documented. What concerns us are the actions of your clients, which may constitute harassment of a federal employee. Brianna's composure cracked visibly. She folded her hands tightly but couldn't keep them still. Marcus cleared his throat. We're simply asking for transparency, he said. Transparency isn't obtained through hiring private investigators and making anonymous inquiries to military authorities, Howard responded calmly. Here's documentation of the investigator contract your client signed, including the payment schedule. He pushed another folder across the table. Price glanced at the pages, his confident rhythm slowing noticeably as he read. Regardless, Price said, recovering, my clients are entitled to raise legitimate questions about family financial matters. I spoke for the first time, my voice level and clear. Raising questions is one thing. Hiring an expensive investigation firm to dig through my life and feeding information to military regulators is something else entirely. You've crossed the line from family concern to deliberate harassment and attempted coercion. Brianna's eyes flicked up to meet mine, then down again. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ramirez leaned forward. Major Ward has been proactive and transparent in documenting these events. We're prepared to forward all evidence to federal authorities if this harassment continues. I strongly advise your clients to consider their next steps very carefully. Price opened his mouth, but Brianna interrupted, her voice sharper than intended. We're not harassing anyone. We're trying to ensure our family isn't blindsided by hidden financial complications. I looked directly at her. You blindsided me at your wedding in front of 300 people. You've been building a case against me behind my back for weeks. If you were genuinely worried, you could have asked me directly. Instead, you chose manipulation and threats dressed up as family concern. Silence spread across the table like spilled water. You could hear the air conditioning system's faint hum. Ramirez folded his hands. Major Ward, do you have additional documentation for the official record? Yes, sir. I opened my briefcase and laid out 3 color-coded binders. This contains every financial disclosure, tax filing, and investment contract I've signed in the past decade. It also contains a comprehensive summary of my sister and brother-in-law's outstanding debts, which clearly establishes their financial motive for these actions. Price's eyebrows shot up. That's completely irrelevant. It's directly relevant, Howard cut in smoothly. If your clients plan to make formal complaints about Major Ward's finances, their own desperate financial situation and motive will be thoroughly examined by investigators. Brianna's face went pale. Marcus's jaw clenched visibly. I continued, my voice steady and professional. I've built my entire career on transparency and discipline. I will not allow either of you to use my military service as leverage for your personal debt problems. This is your final notice. Stop the investigations. Withdraw any pending complaints and stay completely out of my financial affairs. If you don't, you'll face not just me, but military legal counsel and federal law enforcement. Price turned to his clients, whispering urgently. Brianna whispered back, her knuckles white against the table. Marcus stared at the polished wood surface, saying nothing. Ramirez's voice cut through their conference. Major Ward's financial disclosures are complete and fully compliant with all regulations. This office finds absolutely no evidence of misconduct. Unless your clients have new, credible, documented information, this matter is closed from our perspective. I sat back slightly, hands still folded calmly. I didn't feel triumph. Just the clarity that comes from being thoroughly prepared. Howard leaned in, speaking quietly but firmly. We're prepared to file an injunction if necessary, but we'd prefer to resolve this now, today, without further escalation. Price looked at Brianna with an expression that clearly said, "You need to make a decision right now." She swallowed hard, her eyes briefly meeting mine. "We only wanted to protect our family," she said weakly. "You protect family by being honest," I responded. "Not by hiring investigators and making threats." Marcus finally spoke, his voice defeated. "What if we withdraw everything? All inquiries, all complaints?" Howard answered immediately. "Then this ends here. No more private investigators. No more legal fishing expeditions. You focus on your own financial situation. She focuses on her career. Clean break." Price nodded slowly. "That would be the advisable course." Brianna let out a shaky breath. "Fine. We'll withdraw everything." I didn't smile. I simply began gathering my binders. "Good." Ramirez stood. "We'll note that agreement on the official record. If anything changes or if there are any further inquiries, Major Ward will be notified immediately." The meeting concluded with the rustle of papers and scraping of chairs against floor. Brianna rose stiffly, her designer suit suddenly looking like armor that no longer fit properly. Marcus avoided my gaze entirely. Price collected his folders with barely concealed frustration, muttering something about needing to prepare withdrawal paperwork. I shook Captain Ramirez's hand. "Thank you, sir. Stay the course, Major," he replied with a slight smile of approval. Howard and I walked out together into the corridor. "Textbook execution," he said quietly. "Textbook doesn't always mean finished," I replied, keeping my voice even. He gave me a knowing look but didn't press the point. Outside, the sunlight was bright, but the air carried a cool breeze. I paused at the top of the steps, inhaling slowly and deeply. Soldiers crossed the courtyard below in their uniforms, movements crisp and purposeful. Life continued in its orderly military rhythm. Howard handed me a slim envelope. "Complete copies for your personal files," he said. I slipped it into my briefcase. "Thank you for everything." "You sure you're okay?" he asked, studying my face. I met his eyes. "I'm steady. I'm always steady." We parted ways at the parking lot. I walked to my car, heels clicking methodically against the concrete. At my vehicle, I paused and looked back once at the JAG building. Its stone facade was impersonal and official, but today it had functioned as my shield. Sliding into the driver's seat, I set my briefcase carefully on the passenger side. The engine started with its familiar smooth purr. Traffic moved slowly out of the parking lot, a line of vehicles heading toward the base gate. As I merged into the flow, my mind automatically processed what had just happened. Documents filed, disclosures complete, boundaries clearly established. No drama, no shouting. Just order and documentation prevailing over chaos. I stopped at a red light. Outside my window, a group of young soldiers waited at a crosswalk, laughing at something on a phone. I wondered if they'd learned yet how complicated family relationships could become, how the people closest to you could sometimes be the greatest threat to what you'd built. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator and drove on, the steady hum of tires on pavement a soothing rhythm. My briefcase sat locked beside me, containing everything I'd needed to protect myself. The road ahead was clear and familiar, just another route I'd planned and executed. My breathing matched the quiet rhythm of forward motion. Steady, purposeful, moving ahead. The next morning started with an unexpected knock on my door. I'd been awake for hours, sitting at my kitchen table with black coffee, reviewing emails from JAG that confirmed the official withdrawal of all Brianna and Marcus's complaints. Howard's cease and desist letter had worked perfectly. Now it was up to me to set the final immovable boundary. When I opened the door, Dylan stood there. His hair was disheveled from lack of sleep, his jaw tense with stress. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit down. He paced my small living room just like he used to before big exams when he was younger. "Brianna is furious," he said. "She's saying you humiliated her in that meeting. She's claiming you're trying to destroy her." I remained seated at my table. I defended myself. "That's all." He stopped pacing and stared at me. "But she's still my sister, and you're still my sister. This is tearing me apart." "That's exactly why we're having this conversation before things get any worse," I said evenly. "I need you to understand what actually happened." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "She thinks you're out to ruin her completely." "Dylan, I'm not trying to ruin anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm protecting what I've built through years of careful work. I'm protecting the integrity of my military career. Those are very different things from revenge." He exhaled hard and finally dropped into the chair across from me. What do you want from her? Nothing, I said, except for her to stop. No more investigators, no more veiled threats, no more attempts at manipulation. If she stops completely, this ends quietly and we all move on with our lives. Dylan pressed his palms against his eyes, then looked at me with visible exhaustion. She's terrified, Colleen. They're drowning in debt. She thought you'd help bail her out. I nodded once. I know. I've seen all their financial records. Howard traced everything. He blinked in surprise. You know? You've known the whole time? I had to know, I explained. She turned this into a legal matter when she hired that investigator. I had to understand what I was facing. Dylan's shoulders slumped. She'll never forgive you for this. Forgiveness isn't my goal, I said quietly. Clarity and boundaries are. I'm not interested in punishing her. I'm interested in protecting myself. He stared at the table for a long moment. What if she apologizes? An apology doesn't erase what she's done, I said. It might change how we interact in the future, but the boundaries I've set will remain firm regardless. Silence filled the space between us, broken only by the ticking of my wall clock. Finally, Dylan stood up slowly. I'll tell her what you said. Tell her one more thing, I added. If she continues pushing, she won't just be dealing with me. She'll be facing federal charges for harassment of a military officer. This isn't a bluff or a threat. It's a statement of legal fact. His eyes searched mine. You've really changed, Colleen. No, I said. I've just stopped pretending my patience is infinite. I've stopped accepting being treated as less than I am. He left without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it briefly, the cool wood grounding me. Then I returned to my table, opened my notebook, and wrote a clear header at the top of a fresh page, Final Boundaries. Underneath, I wrote specific bullet points. No further contact unless through legal counsel. No financial involvement of any kind. All future interactions documented zero tolerance for manipulation. I closed the notebook and set it aside carefully. Later that afternoon, Brianna herself appeared at my door, unannounced. She didn't knock politely, she pounded urgently. I opened the door but stepped into the hallway, physically blocking her from entering my apartment. She wore oversized sunglasses and a tailored coat, but the overall effect was fragile rather than intimidating. We need to talk, she said, her voice tight. We're talking right now, I replied calmly. She glanced around the hallway nervously, then lowered her voice. You're going to ruin me completely, Colleen. No, Brianna. You've been ruining yourself for years. I'm just refusing to be your financial safety net. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. You think you're so noble hiding behind your uniform and your rules. But you're not untouchable. I don't need to be untouchable, I said evenly. I just need to be honest and thoroughly documented, which I am. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. If you don't help me, Marcus will lose everything. We'll lose our house. Dylan will never forgive you for this. Marcus made his own financial choices. You made yours. Dylan is an adult who can decide for himself who to forgive. But I am completely done being used as leverage in your financial disasters. Brianna's sunglasses slipped down slightly, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. I called you that name because I was angry. I thought you were a nobody living off Dad's pension. Then I found out you were actually successful and it made me furious. You were supposed to be the failure, not me. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding. I don't think I'm better than you, Brianna. I think I made different choices and worked differently. And I think you tried to punish me for succeeding when you expected me to fail. She looked away, her jaw working. We're family, Colleen. Family isn't blackmail, I said firmly. Family isn't hiring investigators to dig into a military officer's private life. Family isn't public humiliation. Her lip trembled slightly. What do you want me to do? I took a slow, deliberate breath. Withdraw everything completely. Stop all investigations. Pay your own debts however you can. Live your own life and stay entirely out of mine. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. And if I don't? I kept my voice absolutely level. Then the evidence I've compiled goes to federal law enforcement. And you'll be answering to them instead of me. That's the last time I'll say it, Brianna. She stared at me, her face a mask of anger mixed with desperation and defeat. Then she spun on her heel and walked down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply until the sound faded completely. I closed the door gently, not slamming it, and returned to my kitchen. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I poured it out, rinsed the mug carefully, and set it upside down on the drying rack. The ordinary motions steadied my breathing and heart rate. My phone buzzed. A message from Howard. Got official confirmation from JAG. Withdrawal filed and documented. Everything on record. I typed back simply good. Thank you. Then I walked to my small balcony. The evening light painted the distant base in muted gold tones. Trucks moved like clockwork along far-off roads, steady and purposeful. I stood with my hands on the railing, not thinking about revenge or victory, just about order restored to chaos. Inside, my briefcase sat closed on the table. Next to it, the notebook page with final boundaries written at the top in my firm handwriting. The letters looked decisive, immovable. I turned off my phone completely, poured fresh coffee, and sat back down at my table. The quiet felt heavy but clean, like air after a storm has passed. No shouting, no threats, no panic, just a clear line drawn and held firm. As I took the first sip of hot coffee, a faint breeze drifted through my open balcony door. Papers on the table fluttered slightly but stayed in place under the weight of a pen. My breathing matched that steady rhythm. Each inhale measured, each exhale deliberate. Across the room, the clock ticked forward in its eternal rhythm. Nothing dramatic happened. No phone calls. No more knocks at the door. No surprises. Just a soldier sitting at her kitchen table, holding her ground with the exact same discipline she'd brought to every convoy. Every briefing, every long night in hostile territory overseas. I glanced once at the closed door, then back at my documentation. The perimeter was established. The facts were recorded, and the quiet inside my apartment wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space to think clearly. Space to move forward. Space to keep living entirely on my own terms. A week passed. The sound of boots on gravel outside my building signaled the morning mail delivery. I opened my door to find an envelope from the county courthouse. Final paperwork confirming the complete withdrawal of all complaints and the official closing of any preliminary inquiries connected to my name. I signed for it, thanked the mail carrier, and stood in the doorway for a moment with the crisp envelope in my hand. It wasn't victory as much as it was closure, the end of a difficult chapter. I went back inside and placed the document on my kitchen table beside my now familiar comprehensive binder. The binder felt less like defensive armor now, more like an archive of a battle fought and concluded. My phone buzzed. Dylan's name appeared. I moved out of Marcus and Brianna's place, the message said. I needed space to think clearly. I'm glad you did, I replied. She's angry, he continued, but maybe she's starting to realize what she's done. What they both did. I didn't answer immediately. Finally, I wrote, you have to decide what kind of family relationships you want to build from here. That's your choice to make, he responded after a pause. I've been thinking about that constantly. I didn't get married for money or connections. I wanted a real partner. But I ignored warning signs because I wanted it to work so badly. We all ignore signs when we desperately want something to work, I typed back. What matters is what you do once you see them clearly. There was a longer silence before his next message. I'm putting in for a transfer to the Denver office. I need a complete fresh start. That sounds like a healthy move, I said. We ended the conversation there. I looked out my window at the base in the distance, its orderly grid of roads and buildings, and thought about my own next steps. For years, I'd been stationed in the same region, turning down transfer offers because it felt like stability. Now, with the chaos of my sister's attack behind me, I felt an opening, a chance to choose my next chapter deliberately. That afternoon, I visited Colonel Jennings, my commanding officer. His office walls were covered with framed maps from previous deployments, each one marking a campaign or operation. He gestured for me to sit. I've read through the complete JAG file, he said. You handled yourself extremely well. Not everyone would have kept this situation so professionally documented. Thank you, sir, I replied. He leaned back in his chair. I heard through channels that you're considering a transfer request. Yes, sir, I confirmed. Colorado Springs Logistics Command posted an opening that matches my experience. I'm thinking about applying. He smiled slightly. I think you'd be perfect for it. Fresh start, new challenges, excellent command. I left his office feeling a quiet but strong sense of resolve. This wasn't running away from problems. This was strategically choosing my next assignment. Just like planning an optimal supply route. Back at my apartment, I pulled out a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of the first page, Ward Initiative Draft Implementation Plan. The idea had started months ago as a rough sketch on a napkin during a late-night planning session. A scholarship fund for military families named after my father. Now, with the immediate crisis resolved, it felt urgent and necessary. not as a reaction to Brianna, but as a step toward building something genuinely constructive from the wreckage. I wrote clear bullet points, educational scholarships for children of enlisted service members, professional development grants for military spouses re-entering the workforce, completely transparent accounting published annually for public review. I underlined that last point twice with firm strokes. Transparency had been my shield throughout this ordeal. Now it would be built into the DNA of everything I created going forward. The next several days were intensive planning sessions. I met with base finance officers about establishing the non-profit structure legally and properly. I called Howard to draft trust documents that would be absolutely manipulation-proof, designed so that no one, family or otherwise, could use the fund for personal benefit. He seemed genuinely pleased to be working on something positive after weeks of defensive legal maneuvering. "This is you shifting from pure defense to active construction," he observed over the phone. "Not offense," I corrected gently. "Construction. Building something that matters." Evenings I continued my regular runs on the base trail. The rhythm of my steps matched the rhythm of my evolving plans. No wine. No late nights out. Just steady, focused planning for the next phase. One evening, Dylan called again. His voice sounded noticeably lighter than before. "I found a good apartment in downtown Denver," he said. "It's small, but it's entirely mine. And I've started volunteering at a youth center after work. Mentoring kids. It feels really good." I smiled into the phone. "Sounds like you're building something positive too." "I think I needed to see what real integrity looked like," he said quietly. "What it looks like to set boundaries and stick to them." "Thank you for showing me that, Colleen." After we hung up, I stood at my window for a long time, watching the city lights come on as evening deepened. Despite all the chaos and conflict, something solid and worthwhile had emerged. Dylan was finding his own footing. I was shaping my next chapter with intention rather than reaction. I began spending weekends in Colorado Springs, exploring neighborhoods and getting a feel for the area. The air was noticeably thinner at that elevation. The mountains rose sharp and dramatic against endless sky. Fewer people knew me there. I could walk into a cafe in jeans and a sweatshirt and just be another face in the crowd. That anonymity felt like freedom. One Saturday morning, I met with a retired sergeant who ran a small veterans charity. We sat in a modest diner with chipped coffee mugs and worn vinyl booths, and he told me detailed stories about military kids who couldn't afford college even with GI Bill benefits. Parents deployed so often they couldn't help with applications. Families struggling to make ends meet on military pay. I took extensive notes, asked detailed questions, and by the end of our 2-hour conversation, I had a stack of names and contact information for potential partner organizations. Driving back to Virginia that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: steady, grounded purpose. Not excitement exactly, but something more substantial. Direction. At night in my apartment, I began drafting the Ward Initiative's official mission statement. I avoided flowery corporate language, focusing instead on clear, measurable goals. We support military families who support the mission. Education. Opportunity. Transparency. Simple. Concrete. Achievable. The last remnants of Brianna's chaos still occasionally appeared. An email from her attorney with vague procedural questions. Rumors on social media about hidden military fortunes, but they no longer felt threatening. JAG had the complete file. Howard had all the evidence. And I had drawn clear documented boundaries. One evening, I received a brief text message from Brianna herself. Just 3 words: "We're done here." No apology. No explanation. Just acknowledgement that the fight was over. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. That chapter was closed. The following morning, as I laced up my running shoes, I packed the last boxes from my current apartment. My transfer to Colorado Springs had been officially approved. Framed commendations came down from walls. Photos from deployments were carefully wrapped. The coffee mug Dylan had given me years ago went into protective packaging. The move wasn't about escaping. It was about choosing my next assignment deliberately on my own terms. On my final run around the base perimeter, my mind organized all the moving pieces. Brianna had married into a powerful family but was buried in debt. Marcus had a prestigious title but no real authority. Together they'd discovered just enough about my career to become dangerous. And I had responded not with emotion, but with the same disciplined planning I brought to military logistics. Back home after the run, I showered and dressed in casual civilian clothes. That evening, I invited a small group of close colleagues to my nearly empty apartment for a simple farewell. We ate takeout on paper plates, laughed about old field exercises and near disasters in supply chain management, and swapped stories about the controlled chaos of military life. No one mentioned Brianna or the recent legal drama. That part of my story was private, resolved, and filed away. After everyone left, I washed the few dishes, wiped down the kitchen counters, and sat at my table with the comprehensive binder one final time. It no longer looked like a battle plan. It looked like history. A detailed record of how discipline, documentation, and calm had prevailed when everything else tried to spin into chaos. I closed the binder carefully, placed it in a box marked Personal Records Archive, and sealed the lid with packing tape. Through my window, the city lights glowed in familiar patterns. Trucks rumbled in the distance on their endless routes. My breathing matched that steady sound, calm and measured. On my kitchen counter, a new notebook lay open to a page titled Ward Initiative Next Steps. Underneath, I'd written clear action items: launch first scholarship cycle by fall semester, partner with established veteran-run charities, build completely transparent website with public financial reporting. I underlined that last point one more time with firm emphasis. Then I set down my pen, closed the notebook carefully, and leaned back in my chair. The apartment was quiet except for the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. Just a soldier at her kitchen table, planning the next mission with the same care and precision she'd brought to every previous operation. And as the night settled around me, that plan felt as steady and reliable as any convoy route I'd ever mapped. Each line of planning a path forward. Each detail a promise that my next chapter would be defined not by retaliation or bitterness, but by the discipline to build something genuinely better from whatever wreckage others had left behind. Moving day arrived under a pale blue sky streaked with early morning clouds. My apartment was already stripped to absolute essentials boxes labelled in neat black marker. A single duffel bag zipped and positioned by the door. I walked through each room one final time, checking windows, turning off lights, ensuring nothing was left undone. The space that had served as my command post through months of family conflict now stood bare and quiet, like a blank page waiting for someone else's story. The moving truck arrived precisely on schedule. Two professional movers introduced themselves with firm handshakes and immediately began the efficient work of loading my life into their vehicle. I watched them carry out boxes with methodical care, comprehensive binders, framed military commendations, even the worn coffee mug Dylan had given me when he was 16. Not kept for sentiment exactly, just an object that had survived every permanent change of station and deployment. By midday, I was on the highway headed west. The moving truck followed somewhere behind me in the flow of traffic. The road to Colorado Springs unrolled steadily under a vast sky, the Rocky Mountains sharpening on the horizon as miles accumulated. Each highway exit marker felt like another checkpoint cleared. No emotional heaviness, no anxious anticipation, just purposeful forward movement. When I arrived at my new apartment near the base, the air was immediately different, thinner, cooler, carrying the scent of pine from nearby forests. Mountains rose dramatically beyond the windows, and I could hear a creek running just behind the building complex. Its sound was faint but constant, a natural rhythm that felt grounding. The movers carried boxes inside while I opened the balcony door to let mountain air flow through the empty rooms. Unpacking didn't take long. I'd always lived simply. My desk went up first laptop, printer, and a fresh notebook labelled Ward Initiative Launch Phase. The comprehensive binder of old documentation went on the lowest shelf of my bookcase. I didn't need it for active defense anymore. It was simply part of my personal history now, archived but accessible if ever needed. That evening, I walked through my new neighborhood slowly, deliberately. Families sat on porches enjoying the cooler mountain evening. Kids rode bikes along quiet streets. A retired master sergeant was watering his small garden, and he nodded in greeting as I passed. People here acknowledged each other naturally, not because they recognized me or knew my story, but because neighborly recognition was simply the local habit. I appreciated that kind of anonymous friendliness. The next morning, I reported to my new assignment at the Logistics Command Center. The office was larger but quieter than my previous posting, filled with detailed spreadsheets and complex supply forecasts, rather than interpersonal drama and office politics. Colonel Matthews, my new commanding officer, welcomed me with a firm handshake and genuine warmth. "We've heard excellent things about your track record," he said. "Very glad to have you here, Major Ward." "Glad to be here, sir," I replied honestly. During my lunch break, I walked across base to meet a small group of military spouses and enlisted service members who had volunteered to help launch the Ward Initiative. We gathered around a long table in the Family Resource Centre. Various documents and planning materials spread out between us. One spouse, a young woman named Carla, told me about her husband's third deployment and their ongoing struggle to afford her nursing school tuition. A staff sergeant described his daughter's dream of studying engineering but not qualifying for enough financial aid to make it feasible. I took detailed notes, asked clarifying questions, and began outlining the structure for our first scholarship cycle. "We're going to make the entire process simple and completely transparent," I told them. "No hidden requirements, no vague promises. Clear criteria, public accounting of every dollar." Heads nodded around the table with visible relief and appreciation. After the planning meeting, I drove to a quiet park at the edge of town. Sitting on a bench overlooking the mountain creek, I called Dylan. "How's Denver treating you?" I asked. "Really good," he said, and I could hear genuine contentment in his voice. "Work is demanding but satisfying. And I met someone, actually." My eyebrows rose. That was quick. "She's an elementary school teacher. Doesn't care about money or status. Doesn't even know about all the family drama. She's just real." I smiled into the phone. "That's good. Keep it that way until you're absolutely certain about her character." He chuckled softly. "I've definitely learned that lesson the hard way." Then his tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Colleen, I need to say thank you. Not just for how you handled everything, but for showing me that it's possible to set firm boundaries without losing your integrity. That's been the most valuable lesson." "That's the only way to keep your integrity intact," I said simply. "Boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about protecting what matters." We talked for a few more minutes about ordinary things, the weather patterns, a new hiking trail he wanted to explore, his weekend plans. Then we ended the call. I sat on that bench for a while longer, just watching water move over smooth stones in the creek bed. The sound was rhythmic and soothing. In the weeks that followed, the Ward Initiative took shape with surprising speed. Howard flew out once to finalize all the legal trust documents. We opened a small administrative office on base, staffed by 2 dedicated volunteers and a part-time accountant who specialized in non-profit financial management. Applications began arriving steadily. Handwritten letters from worried parents, emails from deployed service members, academic transcripts from young people who'd been barely scraping by financially. Reading them reminded me powerfully of the early years with Mark, when every extra dollar felt like a genuine lifeline. I kept my own lifestyle deliberately simple and modest. No large purchases, no flashy announcements or publicity campaigns. The website launched quietly with a single clear page, Ward Initiative supporting military families. Small donations started arriving from former colleagues and contacts who respected the mission's integrity. On base, my logistics work continued in its familiar, steady rhythm. Planning convoy routes, managing supply chains, conducting budget audits. These tasks felt like second nature after so many years. But now there was a different energy behind the work. Not defensive protection against family sabotage, but the deep satisfaction of building something genuinely constructive and meaningful. One Friday evening, Colonel Matthews stopped by my office unexpectedly. "Saw the article in the local paper about your scholarship program," he said. "Excellent work, Major." "It's just getting started, sir," I replied. "Everything worthwhile starts small," he said with an approving smile. "Keep at it." After he left, I turned off my computer, closed and locked my office door, and walked out into the cool mountain dusk. Soldiers were finishing their afternoon physical training on the field nearby, their cadence echoing faintly across the grounds. The rhythm felt familiar but somehow lighter, like a song you know by heart being played on a different, better instrument. That weekend, Dylan visited. We grilled burgers on my small balcony while the mountains glowed brilliant pink in the sunset. He told me more about the teacher he was dating and his expanding volunteer work with at-risk youth. I shared details about the first batch of scholarship applicants we were evaluating. There was no mention of Brianna throughout the entire visit. At one point, he said quietly, "You seem genuinely happy, Colleen." "I am," I said. "Not because everything's perfect or resolved, but because everything is honest now, built on truth." He nodded slowly. Me too. Finally. After he left Sunday evening, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, listening to the creek flowing below. My phone buzzed once with a text from an unknown number. I glanced at it briefly, then set the phone aside without responding. I thought about Brianna for a moment, wondering where she was and what choices she might be making now with her life. Not with anger, not with any sense of triumph, just as a distant fact of life continuing in its own separate direction elsewhere. Inside my apartment, my desk was covered with scholarship applications for the next funding cycle. Young people from small towns across America, military spouses studying at night after long work shifts, people who reminded me deeply of who I'd been years ago. Determined, capable, just needing a fair chance. I felt quiet satisfaction reading through their carefully written goals. Engineering, nursing, information technology, cybersecurity. Real fields of study. Real futures being built with intention and hard work. I picked up one application, scanned the neat handwriting describing academic ambitions and family circumstances and smiled slightly. Then I set it down carefully and opened my laptop to review our funding budget. Every number lined up precisely. Every donation properly logged. Transparent, clean, and ready to scale up as we grew. The wall clock ticked softly in the background. Outside my windows, the mountains darkened under a crystal-clear sky filled with emerging stars. My breathing stayed steady and even, not from forced military discipline now, but from genuine ease and purpose. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence of the apartment settle comfortably around me. No briefcase full of defensive evidence, no frantic documentation of threats, no looming confrontation on the horizon. Just a soldier who had learned that holding your ground firmly and then building something genuinely better was its own profound form of victory. As the evening deepened into night, the creek below kept flowing over stones in its eternal rhythm, steady and unhurried. The mountains maintained their solid presence in the fading light. And inside my modest apartment, I sat with a fresh cup of tea, a stack of scholarship applications representing real hope, and the deep knowledge that I had navigated family betrayal without losing my honor, my discipline, or my fundamental sense of who I was and what mattered most. Looking back on everything that had happened, from that humiliating moment at Brianna's wedding to this quiet evening in Colorado, it doesn't feel like a revenge story. It feels like a lesson in the power of boundaries. My sister tried to use public shame and financial leverage to pull me into her chaotic world. I responded not with matching drama, but with the same careful planning and documentation I'd used to manage supply convoys through actual war zones. It worked not because I fought harder or more viciously, but because I absolutely refused to fight dirty. I refused to compromise the standards I'd built my career on. I've learned through all of this that honor isn't just a word you say at military ceremonies or write in official documents. It's the accumulation of small, consistent decisions you make when nobody's watching closely. Documenting truth even when it's tedious. Saying no to manipulation even when it comes from family. Keeping your promises even when you're exhausted and tempted to cut corners. Those small, consistent choices are what allowed me to walk out of that wedding, that manipulative lunch meeting, that tense JAG conference room with my head up and my record completely clean. Now, as I sit at my desk in Colorado Springs reviewing scholarship applications, I see the faces of young people and military families who simply want a fair chance, not a handout. They're exactly why I built the Ward Initiative. The reason I left all that chaos behind and chose to focus on something constructive. In helping them, I'm not erasing what happened with Brianna. That's not possible and probably not even desirable. I'm transforming that painful experience into something genuinely useful and meaningful. I don't need or want an apology from her at this point. I don't need to win, in any traditional sense. What I needed was to protect my integrity and my carefully built reputation, and then to create something positive from the wreckage of that family conflict. That's exactly what I've accomplished. And every single time a military family receives a scholarship letter with our logo at the top, every time a spouse gets funding to complete their professional training, I know that the quiet choices I made throughout that ordeal, choosing documentation over drama, discipline over retaliation, service over spectacle, those were absolutely the right choices. That's the real ending of this story. Not the confrontation itself, though that was necessary. Not even the legal victory, though that provided essential protection. The real ending is this steady work afterward, building something that matters. Honour as sustained action, not just words. Service as a daily practice, not just a uniform. And boundaries not as punishment or revenge, but as the essential foundation for protecting what you've built and creating space to build something even better. That's what I'll carry forward from here.